On the 27th of September 1957, Ghana joined the IMF. Nkrumah approached IMF in 1965 when the Ghanaian economy took a dive but found the conditionalities unacceptable. But the National Liberation Council government, led by Afrifa and Kotoka, accepted the IMF with all its conditionalities. Reduction in overall government expenditure, reduction in bank credits to public and private sectors, retrenchment in public sector, and the consequences followed. Inflation fell from 13.24% in 1966 to 6.5% by 1969. GDP growth increased from negative 4.28% to 6%. In 1969, under the government of K.A. Buzia, another IMF program was rolled out, which also led to job losses, wage cuts, cuts in government social interventions. Annual GDP growth also averaged only 5.3%. Then in 1972, after the coup, a Champions National Redemption Council's NRC government refused IMF help and adopted homegrown policies such as Operation Feed Yourself and Operation Feed Your Industries, which stabilized the economy for some time, and the results were amazing. Economic growth was restored to 8.5% within 3 years. But this economic prosperity under a champion was short-lived due to fiscal indiscipline and corruption until he was toppled by the Supreme Military Council, led by Ekufu in 1978, who approached IMF for a bailout, and this resulted in the devaluation of the cedi by 58%. Formal sector employment also dropped from 455,000 to 337,000. In the 1980s, Ghana witnessed the great economic downturn, sending Ghana back to the doors of the IMF under the PNDC, which happened to be the longest. The IMF program under the PNDC was intended to arrest the downward economic trend and correct structural imbalances for sustained growth. The aftermath: removal of subsidies on food, petrol, and essential social services such as education and health, tax increases, privatization of some public institutions. The economy was stabilized under the Rawlings administration, where the IMF pegged growth rates between 1983 and 1989 to 5%. But the reality of the bailout was a reduction in formal sector employment from 337,000 to 215,000 by the end of 1989. Net primary school enrollment continuously declined from 80% in 1980 to 73% in 1988, reaching 66.8% in 1990. In fact, Ghana's external economic environment deteriorated by the 1990s per the NDC-IMF program. In year 2000, under the same program, the Ghana cedi lost about half of its value and inflation soared to 30%. The ruling New Patriotic Party in 2001 enrolled Ghana on IMF/World Bank's heavily indebted poorly countries initiative, HIPC, having inherited a deteriorating economy. Monetary policy was strictly limited by macroeconomic stabilization under the HIPC initiative. The HIPC program led to a substantial decline in overall unemployment and poverty, unlike the 1980s and 1990s. Under the HIPC initiative, unemployment dropped by 6.5%. Ghana weaned itself off the IMF in 2006, only to fall back in 2009 under a Poverty Reduction and Growth Facility (PRGF). The IMF prescription under the Atamel's administration was the same. Prices of goods and services kept rising. Erratic power supply, volatility of the Ghana cedi, falling crude prices on the world market, excessive borrowing, and some say mismanagement of the economy have forced Ghana into its current $900 million bailout program with the IMF. It is important to note that 1. Conditionalities of the current bailout program are the same, but the IMF insists it's a partnership, not an imposition. 2. The country's total debt portfolio reached $90 billion by June 2015, compared with the total debt of $6.025.6 million as of 2001. And 3. The Institute of Statistical, Social and Economic Research thinks Ghana's current situation is miserable, having predicted epic times for Ghana earlier this year. Despite all these unfavorable economic factors, it's surprising to know that the government still thinks Ghana is doing well under the IMF program.